We are very lucky today because when Graydon Carter started the notion of a new establishment, if there was one person at the epicenter of it, it was the cable cowboy, John Malone, who invented the concept really along with Ted Turner and others, but was the driving force behind creating new forms of content, bundling it and connecting it with distribution, and having the type of cooperation that created this great model. We also, of course, David Zaslav, one of our sponsors, head of Discovery, but somebody who, when he took over Discovery 7 years ago...
Almost 10.
Almost 10, but you quintupled it in value in the past 7 years. I just looked it up, so that's pretty cool. And so I want to welcome both of you. Thank you all for coming. I'm going to start, Mr. Malone, by asking you, in 1999, you got out of the U.S. cable industry. You came back a couple of years ago. What did they screw up while you were gone?
Well, first of all, Mr. Malone was my dad.
All right. Thank you, John.
I'm John.
Yeah.
And I exited the U.S. cable industry sort of when we merged TCI, which was the big U.S. cable company, into AT&T. And I couldn't get back into the industry because, first of all, I was a large shareholder of AT&T and on their board, and second of all, the antitrust guys probably wouldn't have liked that too much. But what did they do wrong? Well, cable had evolved as sort of a club because each franchise was geographically separate from each other. And so while there was a certain amount of competition for M&A, there was really no direct competition between
So you all
the
cooperated.
operators. So everybody cooperated so we could create things like Cable Labs or Prime Star, which was our satellite effort, or
launch channels like CNN in conjunction.
or collectively. I know at one point we TCI alone had something like 26 investment positions in content companies. It got to the point where the Justice Department had a better corporate organization chart than we did. But over time, this was all based upon trying to feed the machine, which was make the consumer happy, broaden out the offerings, and drive the business with content. About the time that I exited U.S. cable, a number of things were going on. First of all, satellite was starting to get real traction against cable in the U.S. And secondly, AT&T, the large corporate owner, was now the largest operator in the business, and didn't really understand club membership.
Right.
Let's call it that way. And
So what did they do unclubbable like?
Well, for instance, what they inherited from us was control of a company called At Home, which was the first high-speed internet joint enterprise across the industry. And they proceeded to tell the other partners, let's call it, that they would prefer it if they didn't show up at the meetings, which was not. And
had they been able to do Roadrunner, At Home, do it all together, would that have changed the nature of what we are
Well,
now?
the way I look at it, what do we have today? Maybe 80 million, 70 million broadband connections in the country at $50.
Yep.
Okay, and 35% of that would have gone to the At Home entity, the umbrella entity. So the economics of that would have been pretty dramatic. And it was all North America, by the way, not just the U.S. In addition, we went to the Time Warner guys, your old stomping grounds, and said, this new high-speed platform deserves special content that it can deliver over the internet side, not over the linear side. And we actually tried to talk, I think it was Jerry Levin at the time, into putting Roadrunner in and taking the lead in developing the HBO of the internet, which I think he was ready to sign up for it, but his partnership with US West precluded him from doing it.
So David, how do you answer that?
Well, I think that from a content side, I think the big loss was when John talks about bringing the industry together. One of the big things he did was they cooperated in terms of the platform. And cable has a two-way wire into the home, so it's a huge advantage versus the satellite. And if cable had created a TV Everywhere platform, if all the great content that you wanted was on your cable system and it was pliable, just like the way you go to Netflix now and hit a button and see your favorites, you could see any show you want, you can pick up from Discovery or TLC or Animal Planet. If that had happened,
On demand?
on demand, which exists today, which with Brian and John is building it at Charter. But I think that if John was there, if there was a coordinated industry, there would have been a recognition of building a common platform and reaching an agreement with the content players. Because if we had, that platform would have been far superior to the satellite guys, DirecTV and Dish.
Would that have precluded a Netflix coming along?
Well, one, I think that the penetration of the satellite guys would have been significantly diminished. There wouldn't have been a need for a Netflix or an SVOD platform because everything you want would have been available to you through your box. And there would have been a lot more innovation in that box. And it's the lack of innovation in the box that gave rise to the consumer demand for more pliability of content. And so in a capitalist economy like ours, the dollars go to that. And we wake up and now there's a disruptor that's become very powerful and very compelling.
And now that you're back in the U.S. cable business, what are you going to do?
Well, I'm an investor. I don't control these things. I invest in them. But
don't?
I try to coordinate their behavior, okay, if I can, But the reality is, it's all about scale, okay? I mean, the content business is all about scale. The denominator needs to be big, right? This is something Reed Hastings has clearly discovered. And in order to get scale in the U.S. cable industry, you have to aggregate either through cooperation or consolidation. And so, since I've come back in with an investment in Charter, we've attempted to promote the concept of consolidation.
Does that mean that it would be, you feel it's a mistake for people who are in the business making great content, discovery, to be on Netflix and giving their things away anywhere, any platform?
No, not necessarily. I think, people who create programming need to look at distribution very broadly and what distribution is going to do for them, both economically in the short run and the long term. One of the real issues that programmers, I think, have is, are they building a future? Are they building a brand? Do they have transparency in terms of how people are watching their programming? Can they perfect it? Do they have feedback so that they can work with their advertisers if they're ad-supported?
Are you implying that they don't have that if they allow Apple and Netflix to? They don't.
Well, I don't know about Apple.
Well, Netflix.
I haven't seen the contract.
Yeah.
But with Netflix, certainly there's no advertising in the content and de minimis feedback and almost complete submersion of a brand.
Right.
So those are not favorable characteristics with respect from the point of view of the program IP owner.
So that's a bad idea, what they're doing.
Well, it depends on how bad you need the money.
Right.
Well, I think, someday someone will look back. We built this great business with a curated platform of basic cable with some premium services. And it works terrifically around the world. And it's a great economical model that gives us the ability to invest substantially in content. So we invest about $2.5 billion a year in content. We're in 230 countries. Our sub fees alone are over $2.5 billion. And so we cover the cost of our investment. If we could then create great content around the world, we can get advertising and cover the other costs of our company and make a profit. And so it's a very strong economic model that rewards the people that can create great content and great brands. And it's a terrific ecosystem. And there's a lot of talk about basic cable. People need content to be curated. One of the things that you saw throughout the last 10 years or so is VOD, or hit a bunch of buttons and have a choice of 5,000 shows or 6,000 shows. 5,000 equals 0. So behaviorally, we've gotten very comfortable almost everywhere in the world having a choice of 40, 50, 100 channels. We all have 6 or 8 that we love, and a good model. And this fight over, does content win or does distribution win? I think very clearly, distribution, if we got together, if you look at Netflix or if you look at any device or any offering, if you don't have great content, people aren't going to pay for it. And I think people will look back at the last 5 years or so and say, what happened? We have great content, great storytelling, great brands, and there were some platforms that came and said, we'd like your content. And instead of saying, okay, we'd like to build a model together that works and builds an ecosystem so that in these new windows we can both do well, we kind of collapsed for checks, and we put our content into an ecosystem that had no commercials and no branding. I mean,
In other words, a Netflix-like ecosystem on demand.
Which if you go to Netflix today or you go to an SVOD platform, we've spent the last 30 years building a business so that when people go to Discovery or TLC or OWN or Animal Planet, we've curated an environment for them with great content. I think Netflix is a great platform, but it's one that we should have been more malleable, and we should have worked together. And I think in the end, we need to work with the over the phone. We need to work with SVOD. We need to work with Apple. We need to work with everyone, but we need to be more collaborative together to create an ecosystem where there's a benefit to both of us long term.
John said, and putting it together with you said, that the creators would do that, except for some of them, it depends on how much you need the money.
The money in the short
run.
run.
And do you feel that there are players who are so eager to make their short-term quarterly numbers that they're unwilling to play and say, here's our long-term advantage?
I think we're in a dangerous moment where the industry is kind of broken in two. That we have a very healthy ecosystem, even here in the US, where we'll grow for the next couple of years, even with a slight decline in subscribers. Subscribers are growing for us all over the world. We need to recognize that we have a good business that allows substantial investment in content. There are some players that are playing for short term, and they're kind of nourishing this idea of putting your content on platforms with no branding, no commercials, and the checks are starting to decline. So in the long run, if we're going to be healthy, we need to make sure that there's a good deal for both of us.
Are you comfortable naming names?
Well, rather than name names, I'll give you an example. For instance, Susan at YouTube. That's a massive platform, very compelling, and people are spending a huge amount of time with YouTube. She's working very hard now to build a subscription platform on top of it, and talking to all of us and saying, what could we do? What would the splits look like? What would the guaranteed fees look like so that you can invest substantial content in investment for that platform? I think that's the kind of dialogue on all these new platforms that we're going to need for the next 10 years.
Walter, I skipped over one thing in my dialogue there, which was, I went from the U.S. cable when we sold to AT&T, but I became a big shareholder of AT&T. But then we went ahead and got control of DirecTV, and I was actually chairman of this DirecTV, the satellite business, for a few years. Then the government said, well, we don't think it's appropriate for you to be in, so many things. And so I spun off DirecTV to my shareholders and took my shares in DirecTV and had to put them in a voting blind trust, right? So that's a little quick story. But while I was wandering in the wilderness of not having, anything
cable
in the U.S., either satellite or cable, I discovered the rest of the world, right? That actually there's the rest of the world, and for these kinds of services, it was relatively underdeveloped. And so we put a lot of our energy into developing these businesses outside the U.S. And in fact, with David and I, one of the first things that we reached an agreement on when he joined was we got to really push the rest of the world for discovery.
How did you do that? Yeah.
Well, we're now in 230 countries with over 10 channels in every country. We have local infrastructure everywhere in the world. We invested essentially over the last 15 years about $15 billion. We're making acquisitions, building local infrastructure, content, local content. So we're in 52 languages, but I think that part of it was this idea of long term. What John said is, let's take no money out of the business. Let's invest all the profits in this diversified international business. Because when you think about us, our content works everywhere in the world. So Discovery is about curiosity, Animal Planet, science. And so when we take these channels, if you wake up in Russia and you put on the Science Channel, you don't think of it as an American channel, it's a Russian channel. If you wake up in Italy and you put on Animal Planet, it's an Italian channel. And so we've been very successful in taking our content around the world. But then John and I sat down 4 years ago and we said, The world is changing. We're doing very well, and we're growing more than double digit around the world with our content that we have today. But John asked the question, he said, okay, now don't look at the content as content on channels. Now, assume that content is IP, and you could watch anything.
In other
How
words,
good do
the
we do?
channel branding model dissipates.
What happens if people could choose brands and content, or if people can choose just their favorite content? How good are we then? And so the last 4 years, we've gone on a journey. We're now the leader in sports in Europe. We've aggressively invested in kids. So we're driving our existing model. We invested in free-to-air across Europe, but really with an eye toward, we have a great business for the next 5 to 7 years, but as pliability of content and random access becomes more meaningful, let's make sure we have the best IP to take advantage of it. And
How
we're
did
still
the
working on that.
Olympics fit into that?
Sports.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very compelling sport. It puts Eurosport, which we are now, I guess, shortly going to be the 100% owner of, in a very strong position across all of Europe. And where can you buy IP like that is so pan-European, where you already have a big investment in a multi-channel European
But
service?
how dependent is the cable bundling content model on sports, which is the one thing you have to watch when it happens?
Well, in the relationship between a distributor, an aggregator like David, and a distributor like My Liberty Global, for instance, what's really important is that there's at least something that they absolutely have to have, okay? And that opens them up to that discussion that David was talking about how do we discuss the evolution of the industry, and in very much in particular advertising, because an important part of the food chain for the programming industry is advertising. And in the brave new world of random access, what happens to advertising? And do we walk away from that revenue stream that's so important? Or do we figure out how to work with distributors and advertisers? Once we're on a random access platform, we suddenly know a lot about the behavior of the viewer. We can feed that back to the advertiser. We can also feed that back to our own programmers, so they can optimize what people really want to watch. You know, and we can put tonnage out there, but what's really important is what is it people are really interested in watching, and what characters, what continuing stories really have traction and become, as a panelist said earlier, addictive.
Right.
You know, going to this addictive point, which I think, we kind of title it superfans. Yes, sports is compelling. So if we have the French Open across Europe and we reach 700 million people, the people that love tennis have to watch it. But what we've tried to do is get into niche channels that have superfans. So with Oprah, the people that love Oprah and love that channel feel like they have to watch it. We launched a channel 4 years ago called ID, Investigation Discovery. Henry Schleif is here.
That became like #1 for yeah.
In the month of September, ID was the #1 cable network in America for women, and it was the #1 length of view. We've taken it around the world. But this goes to our philosophy, which is the last big cable networks to launch and be top 10 in the US were History and Fox News. And 7 or 8 years ago, we said, we don't think it's over. We think that there's some pliability to the way people watch content. And if we could launch some brands that are compelling, put real resources against great content, great storytellers, we could still build some channels that are really strong. So ID we launched 4 years ago. It's #1 in America for women. Oprah Winfrey Network is now a top 20 network, but it's the #1 or 2 network for African Americans. And it's not just what the ratings is that when John, with his other hat, when we're negotiating a deal, goes into his office and closes the door, he's going to ask the question, how much do I need this stuff? And so for Discovery, here in the US, Discovery is the #1 cable network for men, except in football season. ESPN beats us. Other than that, we're neck and neck. It's critical that we keep that position of being #1 or 2 for men, because we need to be in a position where when John closes that door, he says, well, wait a minute. People love Animal Planet. They have Discovery, it's number one. People love Oprah. They got that Science Channel. So it's having a group of people that love your brands and love your content. Much more important than it's ever been.
But what happens when the cable model unbundles or over the top happens or whatever? Does that destroy that notion of creating channels?
Well, I think, as Richard said, brands are critical, and there's going to have to be some curation. So I would say the first thing is there's been a big discussion about skinny bundles and how things are changing, at least contractually here in the U.S. For the next 3 to 4 years, there'll be very little change because the system is very locked with long-term deals.
But when you have something like that where the system doesn't allow it to change, you build up a desire for disruption. Are you worried about that big disruption, John?
No, I think what happens is you farm both sides of the fence.
You do, yeah.
No, you do. You basically say, okay, it doesn't mean you have to become distributor unfriendly, right?
Right.
It just means that your distributors are offering services that include your content away from the big bundle. Mm-hmm. You build a little bundle. Okay, people want this role of aggregator. I think is very important. We're not going to have 27 subscription services in the average household. The public's just not going to do that. Mm-hmm. You'll have 2 or 3, 4, maybe.
So bundling will continue.
Somebody's going to have to do the bundling, or there's going to have to be a massive consolidation of content creators, which the government probably would discourage.
So you've mentioned the Justice Department just now, but I think 4 times if I've counted right. Yeah. Imagine the Justice Department looking over your shoulder and you could call others in the industry the way you did back in the old days when it was you and Ted Turner and Magnus and others. Right. What would you say to them if you didn't have to worry about that?
Well, for instance, if I put my charter hat on,
that's what I meant,
right? U.S. cable operator, I would say, why don't we get together with Comcast and have a common random access platform that includes all of our cable stuff and HBO and Starz and Showtime and all the broadcasters, and let's do it off of one technical platform, and let's offer that to all the other guys, all of our brethren in the cable industry.
That's what you did 25 years ago with cable land.
That's what we did with Ted Turner, right? When Ted needed help because he paid Kirk Kerkorian too much money for an asset, we had to bail him out. So we raised the money in the industry, pumped it into Ted. In order to get a return on that investment, we created some new channels. We created TNT, Turner Network Television, you may remember, and we launched that with Sunday night NFL football, right? Mm-hmm. You could never have done that if you didn't have collaboration. Yeah. No one company was big enough to underwrite, the affiliate fee that was required in order to justify. And
with your Discovery hat, what would you do?
Well, I think we have real alignment because if the cable industry, if they could build a TV Everywhere platform that was uniform, what that would mean, TV Everywhere is a platform where you can pick whatever content you want. The commercials are in there, and the commercials are measured by Nielsen. So it's a win-win. You could watch linear live, or you can go watch Naked and Afraid from Discovery or Super Soul Sunday from Oprah, and when you pull it in, you would pull it down on John's system with one button, and there would be commercials there. You would know that you're watching one of my channels, so I get the branding value. I get the economic value. And if that would happen, the cable operators in the U.S. would look very strong because they would have broadband, phone, multi-channel to the home, as well as a compelling SVOD platform. And I think that would make it very difficult for some of the other players. But it would be
other players meaning Netflix, Apple.
No, I think Apple could do a very compelling platform. They're getting very creative, and I think they might bring a younger demographic. So I think the position that Eddie's taking on TV, I think we're all waiting for him to come because we think he's taking a very positive approach. But it would be a very compelling offering versus the satellite distributors. But most importantly, it would be the most friendly platform to content owners, and we would invest more in content because when people watched us on SVOD, they'd be knowing what our brands are, and we'd be getting paid for the commercials.
Real quickly, before we go to the audience, I'd love you to react to some of the interesting things that were popped up